With this successful commercial plant, I think we did the very successful first step.
The proven long-term success of the Spanish project has created a solar tower awakening. From China to Morocco, tower power is beginning to capture the attention of investors and government officials. But not all solar towers are created equal.
There's yet another very interesting solar thermal technology. That's where you simply take an upside-down funnel and allow the sun to pound on that funnel all day long.
Not surprisingly, the funnel model was first tested in eco-friendly Spain, just outside Madrid, in sun-drenched Manzanares. The project was based on a simple principle of physics. Hot air rises. The plant started with a massive greenhouse. A clear polymer canopy, or collection area, surrounded a 630-foot tower with a hollow bottom. As the sun beat down on the canopy, the air underneath was heated to 95 degrees above the ambient temperature. The heated air moved toward the cooler air at the top of the tower. That updraft funneled through a large turbine stationed inside the tower. The plant operated from 1982 through 1989 and put out 50 kilowatts. Not much, but it worked. The design seemed ready for its day in the sun. But in the late 1980s, oil was cheap and interest chilled.
We've learned that there's a couple of things that drive investments in solar towers. One is the cost of oil. The other thing, of course, is government policy.
Now, with oil prices at record highs and environmental issues burning in the public's consciousness, interest in the Manzanares model has reached critical mass. An Australian firm called Enviromission plans to take a new tower to unprecedented heights.
It will be one of the largest structures, if not the largest structure on the face of the Earth.
The steel-reinforced concrete tower will rise 2,500 feet above the Earth. That's nearly half a mile, and twice the height of the Empire State Building. Its base will be 430 feet in diameter, wide enough to provide a firm anchor during high winds. The glass and polymer canopy will span 3 miles, gently sloping from a height of 6 feet at the perimeter to 100 feet at the tower. There, 32 jet-sized turbines will be waiting to take the hot air and turn it into electricity. The tower promises year-round energy.
Greenhouses still operate in winter, so they still collect warm air. You still create a temperature differential. You may not have the huge output you have in summer, but you will certainly have a very substantial output.
Enviromission believes their tower will light up the power grid with an astounding 200 megawatts. Even if the tower runs at 80% capacity, that's enough power to fuel 500,000 households. Enviromission has already purchased a 20,000-acre site between Melbourne and Sydney.
It'll be an engineering marvel and obviously a renewable energy icon.
And it will be expensive. Estimated cost to build the tower is $700 million. It's a hefty price, but one that would eventually pay for itself.
It will be, we believe, competitive in output with coal, but it is more expensive to build, but it costs nothing to run.
With investment capital rushing toward green machines, that $700 million looks attainable. Jetson-style transport module included.
I think this is the holy grail of renewable energy. Opportunistic, yes, obviously. I mean, you don't do anything for nothing. But what was a dream became a passion. We are going to get it built.
There's another green machine that's just been built. A car that runs on air. And if its French inventor has his way, it will be the automobile of the future. Listen to the distinct sound of this pollution solution. It's a car that runs on compressed air, called a CAT for compressed air technology. It's the result of 14 years of research and development by French engine designer Guy Negre. With the CAT, Negra has created a car that produces zero emissions.
The premise of this project was that in order to run a car, particularly in town, you need very little energy. And with compressed air, you can accumulate enough energy to do that.
Compressed air has long been used as a power source for various tools and equipment. For car designers, compressed air has been difficult to harness. But now, Negra and his team at Motor Development International have built an engine that they believe will blow the car market away. Within an internal combustion engine, gasoline and oxygen ignite. The resulting explosions create pressure, which pushes the pistons that turn the crankshaft. With MDI's engine, precisely timed bursts of compressed air create the pressure needed to drive the pistons, pollutant-free. Supplying enough energy to power the car requires pressure at 4,300 pounds per square inch. That's more than 100 times the pressure in a standard car tire. Forced inside a tank small enough to fit under the Cat's chassis, it's the formula for a potential ticking time bomb. So the pressure was on the designers to build a tank that won't explode.
This is to give you an idea of the technology inside of the car. You can see that under the floor you have some carbon fiber tanks. It has to be carbon fiber on cars because it is very safe. If there is a crash or something, there's no problem with pieces going everywhere. There is just a crack and then the air goes out.
The tanks can even withstand the force of small caliber gunfire. Since it's being powered by air, the Cat has a lightweight aluminum frame to keep it lean and nimble. The same care went into the body.
The body of the car will be made with fiberglass. Using fiberglass is very important for us because the car will be lighter, and having a light car, you will have more range. In our technology, we won't store a lot of energy, so we have to manage this energy to have a bigger range.
MDI has licensed the technology to Tata Motors, India's largest car manufacturer. And Mexico City is looking at the Cat as a way to cut into its layer of smog. Once the Cat leaves the factory, it will need some air. And MDI will need to convince gas stations to play along by installing industrial compressors and air tanks.
This is a compressor, and you can use this to fill some high-pressure tanks, a huge volume, and then when a car arrives at the air station, you just have to transfer the air from these big tanks to the car, and that takes just 3 minutes.
But airing up can also be done at home. Plug in a compressor that comes with the car, and in 3 to 4 hours, the tank is full. It's now ready to go 125 miles for just $2. If the air is generated with a renewable source, the car becomes a true green machine.
This is the motor alternator to fill the car when you plug the car on an electric plug to fill the tanks.
Put it all together, and the city version, or Mini Cat, will hit a top speed of 70 miles per hour. If you want a Tiger in your tank, MDI has developed a gasoline dual energy version. When the air is depleted, gasoline drives the engine while an onboard compressor refills the air tank. Alternating between the two fuels, the hybrid will hiss along for an amazing 600 miles on one small tank of gasoline. The first car targeted for early production is the Mini Cat. If you think it looks strange from the outside, take a closer look at the steering wheel.
This is why we've put the driver in the middle. Having the driver in the middle, you can put it a little bit more in the front of the car, so you have more volume for the trunk. This is the basic idea. But then also for us, it's more simple to use this car in England and France, for example. There's no problem because the driver is in the middle.
Right side steering, left side steering, it doesn't matter. Guy Negra has made a car for everyone. Costs for the Cats will range from $7,000 for a 4-cylinder Mini Cat to $25,000 for a 6-cylinder family car. Negra's determination to be eco-responsible extends to manufacturing as well.
We are going to expand the industrial concept we came up with. which is to make cars in small factories located within the market. It is an original concept. It's very important for the economy, for social issues, pollution issues, and the environment.
The compressed air car works. Now all Guy Negre needs is the support of the public and the automobile industry.
Breakthroughs are always difficult, especially technological breakthroughs, because the industry generally follows the direction that has already been established, and they don't like to see someone trying to change the course. But today, there's a worldwide need to change the course.
There's a worldwide need for pure water as well. Fortunately, we can turn heavily polluted water into something drinkable, but it's costing us billions. Water and the American West. There's only so much of it. But underneath one of the thirstiest regions in Southern California, there's 1 trillion gallons of it. And a lot of it is polluted, but not for long. 200 feet below the San Gabriel Valley, toxic chemicals have contaminated the aquifer. They've been here for decades.
Back in the beginning of the 1900s, the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, we thought that we could throw things away. We thought we could throw waste into rivers and waste materials into landfills or dump things into the ocean and that it would go away.
And before the 1970s, none of the laws that are in effect today were around, and practices for handling and disposing of chemicals were much different than they are today.
It took one of the worst ecological disasters in American history to force that change. Love Canal. In 1942, an upstate New York waterway became a toxic waste dump, used by a chemical and plastics company. By 1978, nearby residents were suffering with abnormal rates of birth defects, miscarriages, and cancer. From this tragedy came the Superfund, a federal program intended to identify and clean up toxic waste sites across America. For the first time, technology would be used on a massive scale to systematically clean up the environment. The San Gabriel Aquifer is one of those sites.
EPA has identified about 20 companies that we think have contributed to the pollution in this area.
The responsible parties ranged from industrial cleaning companies to rocket manufacturers. Every day, 11 million gallons, about 500 swimming pools worth of contaminated aquifer water, enters the San Gabriel water treatment plant for a cleaning.
The water is pulled out of the aquifer through 3 extraction wells, which feed this treatment plant. The water goes into the first phase of treatment, which is air stripping, through that vertical pipe going up the side of the air stripping tower. The water goes into the top of the tower, and it falls through.
The tanks are filled with thousands of grapefruit-sized plastic balls. Each ball is a porous matrix. As the water falls through the balls, it's broken up into droplets. Meanwhile, air is introduced from the bottom of the tank. When the air meets the droplets, volatile contaminants become vapor and are carried out the top of the tower.
The air with the volatilized compounds leaves the top of the tower and goes into the blue bins, which are carbon filter bins. The air enters the top of the bin, moves through the carbon bed, and then exits out the bottom and up the stack as clean air.
While air stripping removes most of the volatile chemicals, several other contaminants remain. Next on the list for removal is a potential cancer-causing agent, 1,2,3-trichloropropane.
After the water leaves the air strippers, it enters through this top pipe here into these 10 vessels, which are 2/3 filled with granular carbon, which is this material here. The water enters through the top of the tanks, goes through the carbon. Any volatiles that either were not removed by the air strippers, and as well as the 1,2,3-trichloropropane, are removed. The clean water then exits the system through this bottom line here and goes on to the next phase of treatment, which is ion exchange.
At the ion exchange station, the water flows through a series of tanks. The target here is a component of solid rocket fuel called perchlorate. If enough is ingested, perchlorate attacks the thyroid.
They're filled with the ion exchange resin, this synthetic resin. There are 30 vessels on each carousel.
As the water containing perchlorate passes through the vessels filled with resin, the resin grabs onto the perchlorate ions and replaces them with chloride ion.
One last stubborn chemical remains, the potentially cancer-causing NDMA. The best way to eliminate it is by zapping it with ultraviolet light.
This is the last step in our treatment facility. This is the ultraviolet or UV system. The water flows through here. Each one of these panels has 16 lights. The water flows through this light, and the NDMA is inactivated. NDMA is a component of rocket fuel. And this is what it looks like.
Inside the trough, the water passes through a series of 2,200 ultraviolet lights. As the NDMA molecules absorb the light, they're broken down into non-toxic components. At the end of the tank, the water gets a little dash of chlorine and then makes a clean break for the city water supply.
Here we are at the effluent of the plant. What less than 1 hour ago entered the plant as contaminated water is now drinking water, safe for public consumption.
As the clean water leaves this part of the plant, an equal amount of contaminated water will enter at the intake. It's a cycle that will repeat for decades to come.
The area of groundwater contamination is more than 8 miles long and a mile wide. We think it took 40 to 50 years to become that large. It's going to take as long or longer to clean the groundwater up.
To date, at this plant alone, the cleanup has cost a total of $48 million and counting. Of that, the federal government has paid about 30%. The responsible parties have paid the rest. Troubled times sometimes call for radical solutions, like a bizarre experiment that may save the world and a new take on the age of sailing. Aboard the Weatherbird 2 in Fort Lauderdale, Florida, a crew of marine biologists is preparing for a journey that they believe will help save a sick ocean and at the same time help solve global warming by turning the ocean into a giant sponge. The biologists will target an indispensable element for human life: plankton. Some of these microscopic organisms can act as floating forests, gobbling up carbon dioxide from the air and returning it as pure oxygen. But the plankton beds are shrinking at a rate of 1% a year. The Weatherbird crew is determined to reverse that trend with a simple but controversial experiment.
Planktos, our company, is in the business of eco-restoration. We say that we restore the trees and the seas of the planet.
The Planktos team is going to feed plankton beds with a nutrient the microscopic creatures need: iron. The more plankton in the ocean, the less CO2 in the atmosphere.
For every ton of iron that goes into the ocean, about 100,000 tons of carbon dioxide is taken out of the atmosphere by the ocean plants.
Using satellite imagery, the team has identified a pristine plankton bloom for their experiment, 300 miles west of the Galapagos Islands.
Here I have a sampling of some of the iron nutrient that we'll be mixing into the water. And this iron nutrient that we're going to be fertilizing is very fine to where when we drop it into the water, it's going to dissolve. And we want it to float on the surface for as long as possible. That way it'll draw the plankton to the surface.
Over a 2-week period, the Weatherbird crew will use a plastic tube to dump between 50 and 100 tons of iron atop the Galapagos bloom. According to Planktos, that will remove 5 to 10 million tons of CO2 from the atmosphere.
We use these mixers here. We suck up seawater into them. They can hold 300 gallons. We open this up. We put the iron in here. Motors turn on, mix the iron up with the seawater. This in turn, these tubes come to the back and we release that concentrated iron seawater mix while the boat's moving and spread it over the ocean.
After spreading the iron, a research team will stay with the bloom for 20 weeks to monitor plankton growth and to record how much carbon dioxide it has absorbed. They'll test the samples to determine how deep the CO2-filled plankton has sunk. This enables the team to put a time frame on how long the CO2 will remain out of the atmosphere.
Once we dry it, we can identify how much carbon is present in the dried biomass. And we'll do that for different depths, so we can see how much is at the surface, how much is sunk to 100 meters, 200 meters. And as it goes further down, we'll know that carbon has been sequestered for decades, hundreds of years, or millennia.
The deeper the plankton goes, the more pressure there is to hold it down and keep its carbon from rising. If it sinks below 500 meters, it will stay there for upwards of 1,000 years. And that means more money for Planktos that can be made by selling carbon credits. Yes, it's about money too. Carbon credits are a way for CO2-producing industries and individuals to offset their own emissions. By paying companies like Planktos to plant iron in the ocean, trees in the ground, or wind turbines in the sky, we might give our Earth a fighting chance. The worldwide standard is 1 credit equals 1 ton of CO2. Prices vary depending on method.
By restoring the plankton blooms that are in great decline in the ocean, we can bring that life back, and in the bargain, we earn carbon credits, which pay for the whole operation. So it's a wonderful win-win situation for everybody.
Many in the marine science community disagree. To some, the Planktos project may have unforeseen consequences.
When you suddenly cause a bloom of plankton or algae to occur where it otherwise wasn't going to occur, that growth will absorb oxygen, which might rob that particular section of the ocean of oxygen for fish or other things that need to live there. So as with any genie in the bottle, we have to release it carefully if at all.
And although there's no consensus on how much carbon the ocean can hold, for Planktos, the experiment is worth the risks.
Our intention is to discover whether it's okay to do this. And of course, if it doesn't work, we won't be able to earn any money for it. And since we're a for-profit company, our investors will stop funding us and everything will come to a halt.
Other green machines on our oceans are less controversial and a little more lofty, like this German product called SkySail. It's being tested as a way to reduce emissions from the thousands of cargo ships that chug across our seas every day. The SkySail is meant to take some of the burden off a ship's engine. Tethered to the deck with a web of carbon fiber ropes, it gives the ship an added boost to pull it through the water.
You might not turn off the engines all the time, but you can certainly reduce the amount of fuel that you're burning and the number of hours that you are burning them.
Of course, to reduce engine hours, the SkySail must catch the wind. A computer attached to the towing cable reads wind speed and direction, and then guides the sail up or down to the best air. The sail can fly as high as 950 feet, where strong sustained winds prevail. Onboard computers coordinate satellite weather data with shipping lanes for the fastest route. Tests aboard the 180-foot research vessel Beaufort proves the system flies. In 10-mile-per-hour winds, the 80 square meter SkySail produced a towing force of 3 tons. That equated to a savings of 320 gallons of ship diesel per day. If the SkySail was placed on just half the 40,000 cargo ships and tankers on the sea, it would save over 2 billion gallons of diesel per year. With larger sails and higher winds, the savings would increase. When the winds die down or a storm approaches, the SkySail is hauled into a safe berth below deck. As we sail into the 21st century, we look to green machines to help save our environment.
I think technology will make the planet greener. Technology is already saving us. Obviously, we have a long way to go, but I'm not one of these doom and gloom people. Well, I'm very optimistic.
With a healthy dose of optimism and some innovative thinking, we may have the fuel to ensure a clean and prosperous future.
האוקיינוס האטלנטי, האזור הנשכח של מלחמת העולם השנייה.
Make no mistake, the Atlantic was our lifeline.
בשיאה של המלחמה, צי הסוחר הבריטי שומר על נתיבי האספקה פתוחים בכל מחיר.
And he suddenly shouted at me, come on, boy, keep going.
הסדרה מתעדת את הסיפורים המדהימים של שיירות האוניות. שיירות על המים, מלחמה אחרת, התוכנית הבאה.
כן, הקוקייה. אם כך, ירושלים תארח כבר במוצאי שבת את מכבי ראשון לציון. חיפה תרצה להנחיל.
The Atlantic Ocean. The forgotten war zone for one of the most bitterly fought battles of World War II.
And just at that moment, there was the most unholy bang.
German U-boats attacked British and Canadian supply convoys.
The Atlantic was our lifeline. Make no mistake.
Without vital supplies, Britain will fall. Hitler will win the war in Europe. It's a battle of strategy, of punch and counter-punch.
When these depth charges explode, it's a feeling of sheer terror.
A race to develop technological supremacy, or get Lady Luck on their side.
You just hope that other people would be in the water and you would survive.
This is the Battle of the Atlantic. At stake, the outcome of World War II. The German U-boat will become one of the most feared weapons of World War II. The day before war is declared, U-30 runs off the northwest coast of Ireland. On board, 11 torpedoes and 44 crew, ready for the hunt.
We had sworn allegiance to our fatherland and our military. It was 21 years since the First World War, and now it was our turn to fight.
That same day, the liner Athenia leaves Britain bound for Canada. Many of the 1,100 passengers on board are fleeing Hitler's invasion of Eastern Europe. Among them, Jewish refugees Marianne Young and her husband.
We fled the Czech Republic a week after the Nazis had taken over, and we decided we did not want to stay in Europe. I knew that the war was going to break out sooner or later, but I didn't think it was going to break out right then.
On September the 3rd, 1939, Britain and France declare war on Germany.
I was resting on my bunk and a colleague came in and shook me awake. And he said, "Guess what? The English declared war on us." I jumped up and went to the radio room and tried to hear what I could. We were told to treat England as an enemy immediately.
At 4:30 p.m., with the war just 5 hours old, U-30 spots a ship some 400 kilometers northwest of Ireland. The commander, Fritz Julius Lemp, is too far away to make out whether it's a warship or not.
From the way the ship was heading, we could tell it was going from England to America or Canada. We followed the ship until dusk, because the commander wanted to be sure he made no mistake.
But seeing the ship blacked out, Lemp assumes the Athenia is an armed merchant cruiser and goes in for the kill.
When it was dark, we attacked the ship. first attack was with 2 torpedoes.
Eins. Los!
Torpedoes travel at a top speed of 23 meters per second.
We were just starting to be served in the dining room. My husband was with me and his brother and I. We are sitting at the table, and I remember very well we had soup or something. And suddenly there was an explosion. It was black, and there was a chaos.
I ran into the wireless room and heard the Athenia call sign and the SOS. They had 1,100 passengers on board. Oh my God. Then suddenly I realized what we had done.
Commander Lemp knows he's made a tragic error.
I climbed over the railing, I held the hand of my husband and said, "Come on." And he kept on shouting, "Children and women first." The lifeboat was slowly lowered and I lost this side of him. And I was thinking, oh my God, while the ship is sinking and my husband is on the ship. It was just dreadful.
Marianne spends a long night in a lifeboat before being rescued. Athenia is the first U-boat casualty of World War II. The sinking claims the lives of 118 men, women, and children. Returning to Scotland, Marianne searches for her husband.
And I looked at the list of survivors and I found him there. I cannot tell you. It was like God had blessed me.
The sinking is a perfect demonstration of the destructive power of this deadly weapon. But a propaganda disaster. U-30 returns in disgrace. What happens next breaks all international naval regulations.
At Wilhelmshaven, a group of officers came on board. We were called to the torpedo room and told to say nothing about what had happened. The log record of the sinking of Athenia was deleted.
The Germans want no record to show they were to blame, especially as 28 Americans are among the dead. The United States is still neutral. Propaganda Minister Joseph Goebbels claims that Churchill deliberately sunk the Athenia to bring America onto the Allies' side.
In the First World War, the sinking of the Lusitania, a similar case, had brought the United States almost into the war. And that was something Hitler tried to avoid.
In America, the newsreels report the sinking as an outrage. Winston Churchill waits to see what the Americans will do.
There's no question that Churchill would have been pleased, even relieved. What he wanted to see was the United States enter the war against Germany.
But in America, after World War I, there's no appetite for getting involved in another European war. America stays neutral.
It wasn't just Europe that was traumatized by the bloodshed of the First World War, so were the Americans. And there was a reluctance on their part to get involved in another trench war bloodbath.
With Europe rapidly falling to the advancing German army, Britain will soon be cut off. The situation is critical. The country has just 3 weeks left of some of the basic supplies she needs to survive. With no help from America, Britain looks to Canada. The sleepy Nova Scotian ports of Halifax and Sydney suddenly find themselves the hub of one of the largest supply operations the world has ever seen. For Canadians, then subjects of the British Empire, there is no question about coming to Britain's aid.
As far as I was concerned, it was just an automatic reaction. The British Prime Minister declared war, and that, to me, meant that Canada went along.
4,500 kilometers of ocean separate Britain and Canada. Perfect U-boat hunting ground. But Britain is confident that the Royal Navy, the most powerful in the world, will easily protect the supply ships. It has not reckoned on the ruthless drive and ability of one man. In Germany, commander of the submarines, Karl Dönitz, makes plans to take on the Royal Navy and win. During World War I, Dönitz commanded a U-boat. Sunk by the British and captured, he is driven by a thirst for revenge. Dönitz writes in his memoirs,
"I believe in the fighting powers of the U-boat. A first-class offensive weapon in naval warfare and the best possible torpedo carrier.
Before the war, Dönitz personally oversees the construction of the U-boat fleet. Germany is banned from building submarines after World War I, but continues to develop them in secret. Dönitz rapidly creates a powerful modern submarine force. The workhorse of this fleet is the Type 7 U-boat. Twin diesel engines give it a speed of 16 knots on the surface, fast enough to keep up with most cargo ships. And electric batteries allow it to stay submerged for up to 24 hours. It's equipped with an 88mm gun, but the deadliest armament is its 11 torpedoes. Later, Winston Churchill will write, "The only thing that ever really frightened me during the war was the U-boat peril." In the early months of World War II, German U-boat commander Dönitz orders his U-boats to scour the Atlantic for targets. But the Royal Navy dismisses the threat. It's confident that an inherent weakness of the submarine will prove its downfall. U-boats can only travel underwater for short periods before they must surface to recharge their batteries. Here, they can be easily spotted and destroyed. And when they are submerged, the Royal Navy has complete faith in a new anti-submarine technology called ASDIC. Developed before the war, it uses directional sound waves to see underwater. These bounce off submarines and are heard back as an echo. The quicker the return of the echo, the nearer the ship is to the submarine. When the distance is closed, depth charges can be launched. Demonstrations of this early type of sonar so impressed Churchill that he boasts, "This relieves us of our great danger." Within a fortnight of the start of the war, 3 aircraft carriers and 14 destroyers equipped with ASDIC sonar are dispatched to flush out the U-boats. One of the carriers is HMS Courageous. With 48 aircraft and a top speed of 31 knots, she is one of the most important ships in the Royal Navy. On board is John Cannon.
A fortnight after the war started, we were patrolling off the southwest coast of Ireland with an escort of 4 destroyers. Very, very powerful unit. It was just a normal day, nothing would miss.
The pilots were in the air practicing landing and taking off, and also a certain amount of patrolling.
But the sonar has a serious flaw. Its range cannot match that of a torpedo. Outside the detection zone lurks U-29. Its commander is Otto Schuhart. He spots Courageous turning for aircraft to land. He seizes the opportunity and sends 3 torpedoes speeding towards the carrier.
Los!
And I remember looking at my watch. It's 4 minutes to 8. And just at that moment, there was the most unholy bang.
Los!
Seconds later, another tremendous bang when the second torpedo hits.
The torpedoes blow 2 big holes in Courageous. The carrier is doomed.
I made my way up onto the upper deck. And I could see men were already jumping into the water. I slid down the starboard side of the Courageous, dived into the water, and struck out as fast as I could to get away from the ship. And at that time, I saw the carrier settling in the sea. She went down, the sea folded over her like a shroud, and she was gone. Not long after that, everything went silent, but you could hear men thrashing around in the water. The 2 destroyers that were still with us, they couldn't stop to pick up survivors, because if they stopped, they could possibly have been vulnerable themselves.
In fact, the destroyer HMS Ivanhoe is in hot pursuit of Otto Schuhart, using its underwater sonar. The destroyer detects the characteristic sonar pingback from U-29. Schuhart makes an emergency dive to the greatest depth he has ever gone.
Being down there, even without enemy attacks, is not a very comfortable feeling. One sort of hopes one can get higher as soon as possible without any endangering the boat.
The attack lasts for several hours, until both destroyers have exhausted their charges. But Schuhart's luck holds, and he's able to escape. Back on the surface, John Cannon has been in the water for 2 hours. His only hope now of rescue is to reach a passing merchant ship.
So I struck out for the Dido, and I'd been swimming for quite a long, long time, and I was getting very, very tired, very tired. And very strangely, and I don't know if people will understand this, but drowning wasn't a fear. I felt so tired, I just wanted to go to sleep. But swimming alongside of me was a fleet-armed observer, and he must have thought that I'd given up, and he suddenly shouted at me, come on, boy, keep going, your mother and father will be waiting for you when you get home. Believe you me, it put a little bit more life in me, and I set out again, and I kept going again, and I kept going.
John survives, but of the 1,260 crew, 518 are lost. With just 2 torpedoes, a small U-boat has destroyed one of the most important ships in the British fleet. The Royal Navy has badly underestimated the U-boat threat. The consequence is devastating. To avoid further losses, the entire British fleet of 6 carriers is restricted to operations where there's no risk of U-boat attack.
We weren't prepared. At the time, I don't think it had sunk in that we were in such a dangerous position.
Otto Schuhart receives a hero's welcome on his return to port. Dönitz is delighted with the U-boat commander. The attack is proof U-boats can defeat the Royal Navy. Just 4 weeks after the sinking of HMS Courageous comes an attack of breathtaking audacity. U-boat commander Gunther Prien slips into the heavily guarded home base of the Royal Navy at Scapa Flow. Maneuvering his U-boat past anti-submarine defenses, he torpedoes the Royal Oak, a prize battleship with enormous 380mm guns, amongst the largest in the Royal Navy. In icy waters, she goes to the bottom in just 10 minutes, with the loss of more than 800 crew. Many drowned trying to escape through portholes. In Britain, the sinking of the Royal Oak is a national disaster. Even Winston Churchill concedes that the raid has been a remarkable exploit of professional skill and daring.
Sinking a warship with a tiny U-boat, that's what you can call a gallant deed. So you can use this for propaganda.
In Germany, Prien becomes a national hero. Ecstatic crowds welcome him to Berlin. Hitler awards him one of Germany's highest decorations, the Knight's Cross. For Karl Dönitz, it's vindication that U-boats can win the war for Germany. But for the British, it's a wake-up call. To counter the German threat, they deploy a tactic successfully used against U-boats in World War I, convoys. In convoys, merchant ships are grouped in tight formation, guarded by a small number of armed escorts. The tactical advantages are enormous. Ships sailing alone cannot all be given protection. But in a convoy, large numbers can be defended by just a few warships. Hundreds of merchant ships are pressed into convoy service. They're crewed not by the military, but by civilian sailors. Britain draws these merchant seamen from all 4 corners of its empire.
At sea, everybody sticks together. Our ship had English and Arabs on it. And after that, we got Indian crew from India and Chinese crew from China.
I joined the Merchant Navy because I liked the adventure of going to sea. That was a big thing.
These volunteer seamen labor in all weathers to bring the vital supplies of fuel, machinery, and food to Britain.
I've seen a ship right on the top of a wave, and the stern, the propeller is going round out of the water, and then she'd drop right down, and all you can see is water all the way around you.
The spray and the spume would come up on across the foredeck and would freeze in the rigging as it came up.
By Christmas 1939, the convoy system is working. U-boats pick off 110 ships sailing alone, but only 4 are lost to U-boats out of nearly 6,000 crossing in convoys. Dönitz grows increasingly frustrated at the lack of U-boat success. There's one major obstacle holding him back. He'd asked Hitler for 300 submarines, but he's got less than 60.
The major problem we face now is simply a lack of U-boats. We must try to locate the convoys and then mount a concentrated attack with every single U-boat we have.
Dönitz also faces another obstacle. The British control both the North Sea and the English Channel. To reach the Atlantic, his U-boats have to sail around the north of Britain. It adds an extra week to their journey and severely limits their operating range to just a few hundred kilometers off the coast of Ireland. But Once again, the tide of war is about to turn. In the late spring of 1940, Hitler's armies strike west into France. The British are forced into a humiliating retreat from Dunkirk. France surrenders.
The fall of France just changes everything. At that point, all sense that this could somehow be a controlled, limited, if perhaps protracted, European war simply goes out the window. I mean, Britain really is pushed to the brink.
For Dönitz, it offers an incredible opportunity. The day after the surrender, he drives to Brittany on the French coast. Now his U-boats will have direct access to the Atlantic Ocean.
Germany is now a major Atlantic power with defensible Atlantic bases. German submarines are nearly a week closer to the main Atlantic shipping lanes. That greatly increases their time on station, their effectiveness.
Dönitz establishes a base in the port of Lorient and sets up his headquarters in an elegant villa overlooking the harbor. Construction starts on massive U-boat pens built out of heavily reinforced concrete up to 7 meters thick. Armored doors and gun platforms make them self-contained fortresses where the boats can be repaired and refueled. From these huge cathedrals of concrete, all ships in the North Atlantic are now within range of U-boat attack. And they've already been given permission from Berlin to pursue unrestricted submarine warfare.
Do not rescue any men. Weather conditions and proximity of land are of no consequence. Concern yourself only with the safety of your own boat. We must be hard in this war. The enemy started it in order to destroy us, and thus nothing else matters.
Now, no ship is safe. By 1940, with the German Luftwaffe blitzing British cities, some parents decide to send their children across the Atlantic to safety.
I was 11 years old, and my parents decided that because the war was getting close to Britain, that I would have the opportunity of going to America.
A year after war starts, Colin Ryder Richardson is one of 90 evacuee children leaving for Canada on the liner City of Benares. When the convoy reaches 800 kilometers northwest of Liverpool, their Royal Navy escort leaves it to meet another convoy, believing they're beyond the range of U-boats. On the 5th night into the journey, the children are told it's safe for them to sleep in their pajamas, rather than fully clothed with their life jackets on.
We were a bit nervous, but we were assured that we were safe and that we could relax.
At 3 minutes past 10, the city of Benares is hit by a torpedo, just below the children's quarters. In the chaos, Colin finds his way to the lifeboats.
We stood there as all the other children streamed out, mainly just wearing dressing gowns and slippers and teddy bears and things like that, and not realizing quite what was going to happen next.
The city of Benares is listing badly, making it difficult to launch lifeboats. Torpedoed 450 kilometers from Rockall, she had been sailing in an area previously thought safe from U-boat attack. But now ships across the Atlantic are within easy reach of the German U-boat bases on the French coast. One of the children on the ship, Colin Ryder Richardson, finds he is sharing a sinking lifeboat with the dead and dying.
We were all trying to do what seemed sensible at the time, was to dispose of the bodies outside the outside the lifeboat.
After 20 hours in the water, Colin is rescued. Of the 90 children on board, 77 die.
It definitely haunts me, and there's probably not a day goes past without seeing those children. I was one of the lucky ones to survive, mainly because of my life jacket.
Before sending him away, Colin's mother had bought him a life jacket.
And in this pocket, I had a belt and my mother's handkerchief, which I only discovered a few years ago when it came out before.
The sinking of the city of Benares shocks the world. The papers denounce it as a war crime. But for the British Navy, it brings a devastating realization. U-boats, now operating out of their French bases, can strike far out into the Atlantic and hunt convoys for longer. The Battle of the Atlantic has entered its most deadly phase. Convoys defended by warships are still the best protection against U-boat attack. Vice Admiral Dönitz must find a way to overcome their tactical strength. He decides on an audacious strategy. If it works, it will destroy the vital supply lines, which are all that are keeping Britain from collapse. He calls it Wolfpack. The Atlantic Ocean covers 77 million square kilometers. For the first part of his strategy, Dönitz strings out his U-boats in long lines to sweep the ocean. He stays in constant radio contact with the U-boats. So to avoid alerting the Allies, they use ingenious encoding equipment called Enigma.
As we got more submarines in the Atlantic, the order came from U-boat command that when we spotted a convoy, we had to report the sighting back to base and hold off from attacking.
Think of the U-boat pack as a pack of wolves or hounds, however you want to describe it, on a radio leash. Every U-boat has to report every day because the people who are actually tracking and positioning them back at U-boat headquarters need to know where they are because they're moving them around on a board.
When Dönitz gives the order, the U-boats are to attack. Not underwater, but on the surface, where they're faster and more maneuverable, and where they cannot be detected by sonar. The final masterstroke is to strike at night when it's almost impossible to make out the small, sleek outline. The test for Dönitz's strategy comes when convoy SC-7 starts its 17-day journey from Canada to Britain. 35 ships are loaded with steel and timber. But many in the convoy are old and slow. And Royal Navy resources are so stretched, there's only one small escort available. It's the perfect target for the Wolfpack. "11 days later, 2 more escorts join the convoy, northwest of Ireland, the most dangerous part of the crossing. At midnight, U-48 spots the convoy. It relays its position back to Dönitz. Dönitz orders the waiting U-boats to converge on the convoy. They arrive 2 days later. A wolf pack of 5 U-boats goes in.